And most important for me, as a person who tries to look at ethnic and religious sources of violence and believes that this type of violence has to be dealt with in a way different than other kinds of conflict and violence, something that our friend Josh spoke about, pained memory. Pained memory. Pained memory means not so much guilt, not so much anguish. Sometimes it's transmitted, sometimes it's not, things that we ourselves experience. But that pained memory tends to be the reservoir of hatred and resentment, the lakes, the oceans of hatred in our hearts and souls. And unless that pained memory is dealt with, there cannot be any resolution of conflict. And on the other hand, I believe that religion has means of responding to it. I, for example, work with Arabs and Jews in Israel. And when I bring them together, I can assume one thing because of the way in which Israeli society is organized, in which there's very, very little contact between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs, that every Jew in the room is thinking, if my grandfather of blessed memory knew that I were talking to an Arab, he would turn over in his grave. And every Arab in the room is thinking, if my grandmother of blessed memory knew that I was talking to a Zionist, she would turn over in her grave. So there's something shared. There's a pained memory. And the question is, what do you do with these pained memories? There is a way, and it's not easy, but there is a way, to paraphrase what Josh quoted just of Pope Benedict, to take that shared suffering and pained memory and to transform it into a deep bond. To take pained memory and make it empathy. Make it not just, hi, I like you, you like me, but to make it identification. To show the ways in which the big history that we all exist in and that we endure as small people, the way that large history goes through us, ravishing sometimes, confusing, always very confusing, and somehow it leaves us with some common experiences. So, for example, in most conflicts, it would be agreed upon, let bygones be bygones. Let's not talk about the past. In the Israel-Palestine conflict, to talk about 1948, to talk about the Holocaust, these are terribly complex things. And yet somehow these issues have to be dealt with. And when they're dealt with, strangely enough, associations get developed. Your grandmother did that. That reminds me of a story of my grandfather. Or even the reality, you Palestinians, your grandmothers and grandfathers lost their homes. But I don't have a grandmother and grandfather, and none of my friends have because they were killed in the Holocaust. And then there's always a moment of silence and deep empathy. There are ways of dealing with that pain memory and siphoning off that hatred that religion and the language of religion gives us a special opportunity. But if we don't deal with it, we're not going to get any place with questions of where the border goes, or how much money, or how many people should settle. The interest-based issues do not work out unless these kind of issues are dealt with. And religion can be a part of the solution. Religion can be a part of the problem. There are so many issues that we should be talking about. We've gone far beyond Brotherhood Week in talking about faith-based institutions, but not all that far, certainly not far enough. Just in our discussion this day, the issue of hope. It seems to me to talk about hope is just an unfair challenge for many people without starting with trust. One has to talk about the human dimension. Trust is the basis of hope. If there can be trust between people in conflict, then there can be a vision of a future. If that trust doesn't exist, hope is pie in the sky. We talk about the balance, as we did this morning. It is interesting that the very great canon of human rights, almost all of them are entitlements. What about obligations? What is going to balance between obligations and entitlements? What is going to make us feel not only that as a human being, gimme, 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 but that, that I have to give something, but to remember the rabbis of Usha, not more than a sixth, not more than a reasonable amount, that giving is not sacrificial, is not destroying oneself, it's not patlash, it's not demonstrative, that giving is giving, and the Hebrew word really for charity is really tzedakah, which comes from justice, and has to do with, what the other person should get. So these are very difficult issues. The issue of development and social cohesion. It is amazing to me, with all the good intentions that go into the millennial goals, that somehow that development is still thought of as, let's build infrastructure without dealing, with the human problems, the social problems. We'll spend a couple of $1 billion on a new sewerage system, but nothing for human sewerage. And so many of the development plans are simply like that, and they fail miserably. Every school child who takes a course in development, 0001, knows the story about the good people who decided to build a water pipe so that the poor women in the village would not have to carry the water on their jugs, and they built this wonderful brass pipe for 10 kilometers, and guess what happened? All the people in the villages along the way strip down the brass and sell it off. How is it that on the highest level of policy, this is not taken into consideration? I was at the United Nations this year on the 15th anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre. It seems to me one of the darkest days in human history. And I was sitting with wonderful, well-intentioned officials talking about development. And it was not to be taken for granted that development had something to do with social cohesion. Please, my people of faith, get in there and get in there quickly, because it's not coming from elsewhere. Justice and equity. There are so many issues to take us lots of steps beyond Brotherhood Week in terms of dealing with these kind of issues.